From Second Stage Theater, see the new play from the writer NPR calls one of the hottest playwrights in America, with Kate Bornstein, Josh Charles, Ty Defoe, Armie Hammer, and Paul Schneider. See Straight White Men on Broadway for 10 weeks only. Visit 2st.com.
Welcome to the Brief History Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Knight. Producing, editing, and composing of the music is done by Harry Edmondson. Thank you for everybody who's taken their time out and reach out to us on social media. They've left reviews. Any feedback is more than welcome. We are trying to go in a new direction and take all your feedback and turn it into the best podcast we can. So please keep it going. Anybody who hasn't done so, please get in contact. We're on Be History Podcast for both Twitter, Facebook, same for Instagram and Snapchat too. So find us on there and please follow, like, share, subscribe. You know what to do, guys. As you'll notice, last week we had an announcement. We did cover the Korea War, the episode before. As per the announcement, there is a new direction we want to go in. We want to make it a bit more analytical, more opinions with just the history we've done so far. So hopefully you like the new direction we're going. Once again, please let me know how you feel about it, and we can tweak and make changes if need be, but we can't if you don't let us know what you want us to do. So please reach out to us and get in contact. As always, enjoy this episode. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do. That way you get notified, or even like my podcast app that I use, that will download the episode automatically, so you don't have to do anything further or go searching for us. Please leave a 5-star review. It takes seconds. Rate it as well, and that really helps us moving forward, so your help is very much appreciated. Enjoy the episode. This is the Brief History Podcast, and I'm your host, Andrew Knight. Today's episode is on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. We will go through a brief history of it, and then we'll dive into some of the meaty topics today. The Israelis and Arabs have been fighting over a specific part of the country for many years now, which is Gaza. On and off for decades. It has been part of a wider Arab-Israeli conflict. Essentially, after World War II and the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish people were killed, and the Jewish people wanted their own country. They were given large parts of Palestine by the UN, which was the traditional home of the Arabs. Though, when we say Arabs, not to forget that they weren't all Muslim. Large parts of Christians, Jewish, and other religions made up part of the Arabs who lived there. The neighbouring countries and the Arab people itself within the region thought it was unfair and didn't want to accept the new country. In 1948, the two sides went to war. When the war finished, Gaza was controlled by Egypt, and another area you'll hear a lot of, which is called the West Bank, which is by Jordan. This area contained thousands of Palestinians that had fled what is the new Jewish home of Israel. Furthermore, another war was started in 1967, which the Israeli forces controlled Palestine areas, and the Israeli troops stayed there for many years. The Israelis hoped they might exchange the land they had won from the Arab countries and ultimately get recognition for Israel's right to exist and end the war. Israel and its troops left Gaza in 2005 but a terrorist group called Hamas won elections and took control. Now, this is a point of contention. Hamas, as they were elected as part of the Palestinian ruling government, at that point, had they cut ties with the Hamas, the terrorist organisation, or not? We'll discuss that further, but you'll hear Hamas, the terrorist group, and Hamas, the government of Palestine too. What may happen in the future, we're unsure, but certainly Hamas and the Arabs refuse to recognise Israel as a country, and they want the Palestinian people to return to their hometowns. Hamas as a terrorist organisation, and in some cases Hamas as the government had used violence and is using violence to achieve these aims. Since then, Gaza has been under blockade by the Israeli government and the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Force. It controls the borders and limits who goes in and out of the country. 1.5 million Palestinians live within the Gaza Strip, and it is incredibly difficult. Israel controls the coastline, so they've got entry and exit crosses into Israel. There is another crossing point into Egypt, though as of yet there's no working airport. Because of these vast restrictions, not many goods can get in or out of Gaza. Israel controls the flow. They control the flow of food in aid agencies try, but they say families are not eating as much breads and fresh vegetables as they used to, as the Israeli government are actively controlling what goes in and out. There is also major problems within power, so electricity, again, controlled by the Israeli government, and there are lots of power cuts. Unemployment is an issue within the Gaza Strip. One of the main reasons because of this is the products coming in and out, so you don't have the same freedoms that we do over in the West in terms of what can be sold and what actually the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip can afford to buy. There are a number of Palestinian refugees. During the 1948 and 1968 wars, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians left or were forced out of their homes, and they moved to neighbouring countries and became refugees. Up to 4.6 million Palestinian refugees and their descendants are living in camps within the West Bank, within the Gaza Strip, in neighbouring countries, Syria, Jordan and the Lebanon. They do get aid and support from the United Nations as the result too. The Palestinians don't have an active army. Rockets are fired regularly into Gaza and into Israel as well. The border towns are used to take shelter from the Israelis, and they adopt their lives accordingly to these rocket attacks. There has been a number of Israeli offences since the troops left in 2005. The IDF, or the Israeli Defense Force, main aim is to stop the rocket fire from the Palestinians into Israel. Three of the major conflicts regarding these rocket attacks were in 2008. The Israelis sent soldiers into Gaza. An estimated 1,300 people, many of them civilians, were killed in Gaza before a ceasefire was declared, with just the loss of 13 Israeli soldiers. In 2012, at least 167 Palestinians and 6 Israelis were killed during an operation by the Israelis. After an 8-day ceasefire was declared, both sides promised to stop the attacks. And more recently, in 2014, 2,200 people were killed, most of them Palestinians and civilians. Many more were injured during 50 days of violence. A ceasefire was agreed by Israel and Hamas, Hamas being the Palestinian controlling government, on the 26th of August. The peace process has been rocky, to say the least. America has worked tirelessly to help settle the fighting between Arabs and Israel, but nothing has worked. Many other countries within the UN also has tried to broker peace. Many people want Gaza and the West Bank to be turned into a new country, Palestine. Israel won't agree to this as it doesn't feel safe, and they want Israel to be accepted by the Hamas government as a right to exist. At the moment, they don't. Another point that is stopping this is the Israelis who settled in the West Bank, and what will happen to the Palestinian refugees also. It's also important to note that for centuries there was no such conflict. Within the 19th century, the land of Palestine was inhabited by a multicultural population, so around 86% were Muslim, 10% Christian and 4% Jewish. Now, another contentious point is the word Zionism. So in the late 1800s, a group in Europe decided to colonize this land. They were known as Zionisms. They represented an extremist minority of the Jewish population. They wanted to create a Jewish homeland, and they considered locations in both Africa and Americas before settling on Palestine. So as the Zionists started to move into Palestine, or what we know as Palestine now, the immigration created no problems to start off with. However, as more and more Zionists immigrated to Palestine, many of them expressed a wish of taking the land for a Jewish state. The indigenous population became increasingly alarmed due to the numbers and the power grab, if you like. Fighting did break out and escalated to violence. With Hitler's rise to power within the Second World War, combined with Zionist activities to sabotage efforts to place Jewish refugees in Western countries, led to increased Jewish immigration to Palestine, and the conflict grew. Now, after the Second War, the UN partition plan, this happened in 1947 when the UN decided, the United Nations decided to intervene. Rather than adhering to the principle of self-determination of the peoples, in which the peoples themselves create their own state and system of government, the UN chose to revert to the medieval strategy whereby an outside power divides up other people's land. So, under the pressure from Zionists and the wider Jewish population, so we're not saying it's just the Zionists, the extreme group, there were a large number of Jewish people, in no way would be called radical, that called for their own people's land also. The UN recommended giving away 55% of Palestine to the Jewish state. The contentious point here is, at the time, only 30% of the population were Jewish, not 55%. So the Palestinian people thought this was disproportionate, and only 7% of the land were owned by the Jewish people. In 1947 to 1949, war broke out. So the war eventually broke out, including 5 Arab armies. Even though the Arabs had 5 combined armies, it's important to know that the Zionists in Jewish forces outnumbered the Arabs and Palestinian combatants combined more often than not 2 to 3. Though the Arab armies did not invade Israel, all battles were fought on line between the Palestinian state. Now, it's important also that Arab claims that the Arab armies only entered into the conflict after the Israeli forces committed 16 massacres, including the grisly massacre of 100 men, women and children at Deir Yassin. Again, this is contended, but future Israeli President Menachem Begin, head of one of the Jewish terrorist groups or self-claimed terrorist group by the Arab nation, I'm not calling them a terrorist group, but that's what they call them, described as splendid and stated as, quote, as in Dear Hassan, so elsewhere, we will attack and smite our enemy. God, thou hast chosen us for conquest. Zionist forces committed 33 massacres altogether. At the end of the war, Israelis had conquered 78% of Palestine. 750,000 Palestinians had made refugees. Over 500 towns and villages had been obliterated, and a new map was drawn up, with every city, river and hillock received a new Hebrew name, different from the Arab name, and all vestiges of Palestinian culture were erased. Some people will claim that this is ethnic cleansing, so the massacre of the Arab people and then the erasing of their culture falls in with ethnic cleansing, a genocide. Again, both sides will contend or argue this point, but that's up to you to decide. And for decades, Israel denied it existed as a population. Former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir once saying, quote, there is no such thing as a Palestinian, end quote. In 1967, Israel still demanded more land. Following what was called the Six-Day War, the Israeli forces launched a preempted, highly successful surprise attack on Egypt. Israel occupied the final 22% of Palestine that eluded them in 1948, the West Bank and Gaza Strip. According to international law, it is inadmissible to acquire territory by war. These occupied territories do not belong to Israel, another contentious point between the Israeli state and the Palestinian state. The Israel also occupied parts of Egypt, which has been returned, and Syria, which remain under occupation to this day. Also during the Six-Day War, Israel attacked a US Navy ship, the USS Liberty, killing and injuring 200 American servicemen. President Lyndon Johnson recalled rescue flights, saying that he did not want to, quote, embarrass an ally, end quote. Though in 2004, a high-level commission chaired by Admiral Thomas Maurer, former chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, found this attack to be, quote, an act of war against the United States, end quote, a fact few news media have reported. Now, bringing you up to date with the current conflict, there are two primary issues at the core of this continuing conflict. First, there's a destabilizing effort to try and to maintain an ethnically preferential state, particularly when it's a large foreign origin. The original population, which is now Israel, was 96% Muslim and Christian, yet these refugees are prohibited from returning to their homes in the self-described Jewish state. People within this state also are still subject to systematic discrimination by the Israelis. Second, Israel's control of military occupation and confiscation of property owned in the West Bank and control over Gaza are extremely oppressive, with Palestinians having minimal control over their lives. Thousands of the Palestinian men, women and children are held in Israel prisons. Few of them have legitimate trials. There is physical abuse and torture by the Israeli forces. The Palestinian borders, even external ones, are controlled by Israeli forces. Men, women and children are strip searched. People are beaten. Women in labour are prevented from reaching hospitals, which can result in the death of the child or even the mother. Food and medicine are blocked from entering Gaza, blocked and restricted. There is an escalating humanitarian crisis. Israeli forces invade almost daily, injuring, kidnapping, sometimes killing inhabitants. According to the Oslo Peace Accords of 1993, these territories were supposed to finally become a Palestinian state, though after years of Israel controlling and confiscating land and conditions, with conditions steadily worsening, the Palestinian population rebelled. The uprising called Intifada which means in Arabic, shaken off, began at the end of September 2000. The US has been involved, largely due to special interest lobbying. US taxpayers give Israel an average of $10 million per day since its creation, and more US funds to Israel than any other nation. Many Americans are now calling for the Israel expenditure and support to end. Now, to contrast the points from either side, I think it's important we look at both labels. On one end, we've got the far extremist Zionists, and the other, the Hamas terrorists. I think the majority of people both live somewhere in the middle, and labels and attributing either one side or the other to the whole population, Israel and Palestine, is fruitless. It's not going to work. There needs to be a middle ground in dialogue. Everybody's after peace ultimately, and that's what they need to work for. I think it's important that Hamas should stop the rocket attacks. It's difficult to say due to the occupation and the lives of Palestinians are leading because of the blockade that we've got whataboutery or yes, but what needs to be stopped is the rockets. It's simple. Hamas should be condemned for their violence. The rockets, the indiscriminate firing that puts Israeli civilians at risk, unconditionally they should stop. The conflict, it's important to realise the conflict is older than Hamas. As a result, Israel should stop addressing the problems as a 27-year conflict. This conflict has been going on for 65, 67 years. So it's Hamas in recent years has proved the problem, but the roots go back even before Hamas even came into existence. Israel must stop blaming Hamas for the root of all problems, because the problems are there before they started also. So that's important to recognise. So to sum up, Hamas is the symptom of the conflict, but not the root cause of the conflict, and Israel need to recognise that. There are claims that Palestinians are inherently anti-Semitic. This is untrue, and Palestine's historical actions prove otherwise. Before the Israel nation creation, Palestine willingly accepted some 700,000 Jewish refugees escaping World War I and World War II and the Holocaust. This is a massive number considering Palestinians' Muslim population in 1947, and this was only around 1.2 million. That said, Palestinians did not vote for the creation of Israel. Israel's creation was imposed on the Palestinians by the United Nations. One of the main talking points is no country on earth would tolerate rockets raining down on its civilians. No doubt that's true, and I'm sure in the Western first world countries this would be also true, but in fairness, we also need to accept that no country on earth would tolerate being split into two without the right of self-determination or a say in the matter. So if in America, if Canada, if the UK, suddenly we had an influx of refugees, and then the UN stepped in and said, right, we're going to split the country now. The new refugees are going to be self-determinant, and that this is their new country, and you've got to like it and lump it. So we need to start thinking about that too. So Palestinians did serve as a safe haven for Jewish refugees before the creation of the Israeli nation. So it's important to draw on the history and find the common ground between now and the future. Another key point is, since Israel was created by the United Nations, it must live by the United Nations. So a hardline pro-Palestinian argument, especially by Hamas, states that since Palestine never approved the creation of Israel, they will not recognise Israel. The pro-Israel side states the opposite. The United Nations created us by democratic vote, so we are here to stay. If Israel is right, the reality is we cannot undo history. Israel has a right to exist, and it is here to stay, and no amount of arguing or fighting will undo that. A nation born by the UN must live by the UN. Since Israel's creation, the United Nations has passed at least 42 resolutions against Israel for violating international law, 17 of which are passed before Hamas existed. These include resolutions condemning Israel for illegal practices against civilians in Lebanon, condemning Israel's contravention of the Fourth Geneva Convention, calling on Israel to withdraw from all Palestinian territories, calling on Israel to recognise the Palestinian right of return, and calling on Israel to respect Muslim holy places. Post-Hamas, the UN has passed resolutions against Israel to be abided by and accepted the Fourth Geneva Convention, condemning Israel's invasion of Lebanon, condemning Israel's killing of UN employees of the World Food Programme, and condemning Israel's settlements established since 1967 as illegal, all of which has nothing to do with Hamas. This reinforces the point that Hamas is not the root cause of this conflict. Israel has asked the United States and agreed to veto all 42 of these UN resolutions. Israel cannot have it both ways. It cannot, on one hand, claim legitimacy by citing the United Nations decision to create Israel and then ignore UN enforcements to hold Israel accountable to international law. If UN decisions are invalid now, and then they are invalid at Israel's creation. Likewise, and reasonably, since UN decisions were valid upon Israel's creation, they must be valid now, and Israel must maintain justice accordingly. Furthermore, no justification exists for civilian deaths. The concept of self-preservation or zero-sum game does not work in any global village or by any moral compass. The idea that Arab blood is more valuable than Jewish blood, or that Jewish blood is more valuable than Arab blood, is modern-day racism and all its ugliness. A Palestinian child has just as much right as an Israeli child, and vice versa. Any action on either side that ignores this principle is a violation of human rights and derails the peace process. Let us rid us of the cancer of justifying collateral damage and recognise that all human life is equal. Also, all sides have committed potential war crimes and must be held accountable accordingly. Having elected Hamas, Palestinians must be accountable to Hamas war crimes. The firing of rockets indiscriminately is a war crime. Iron Dome and the comparative fewer civilian Israeli casualties acknowledge fire rockets at a civilian population is by definition a war crime. Just because not as many civilians of Israel has been killed does nothing to mitigate the fact that firing rockets at a civilian is a war crime. Also, Hamas cannot hoard illegal weapons in UN schools, especially near refugees, and pretend they are not putting innocent Palestinians in harm's way. Such crimes does nothing to promote peace and only aggravate an already volatile situation. Hamas must immediately cease such acts. Israel must be accountable to UN nations and international law. Israel's use of white phosphorus is a war crime. Their use of human shields is a war crime. Israel's collective punishment of all Gaza is a war crime. Israel's targeting of killing of children on a beach playing soccer is a war crime. Israel's bombing of hospitals is a war crime. These are documented acts by the US mission reports, independent journalists, and by admission of Israeli soldiers. Rather than just ignoring these unjust acts, Israel must own up to their war crimes and immediately cease such acts. America and worldwide Muslim leadership has a massive responsibility here. Since Israel's creation nearly 7 decades ago, the world had witnessed the same violence over and over again. Several peace treaties and efforts has gone by, yet we stand no closer to peace. The Americans' reputation to the rest of the world, and especially the Muslim world, is that of a dishonest thug who enforces its will and blindly sides with Israel. The US has a UN veto power and always sides with the Israelis. Also, the Muslim world must recognise the right of Israel to exist. Muslims worldwide cannot point to dozens of UN resolutions against Israel and ignore the singular UN decision to create Israel. Such an act demonstrates similar hypocrisy to Israel's current opposite practice regarding UN. The ultimate aim must be peace. A major point to consider when it comes to peace is the two-state solution. This refers to a solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which, with two states for the two groups of people, it envisages an independent state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel, based west of the Jordan River. The framework of this solution is set out in UN resolutions on the, quote, peaceable settlement of the question of Palestine, end quote, going back to 1974. The resolution calls for two states, Israel and Palestine, side by side within secure and recognised borders, together with a just resolution of the refugee question in conformity with UN Resolution 194. The borders of the state of Palestine are based on the pre-1967 borders. The latest resolution in November 2013 was passed 165 to 6 with 6 abstentions. The countries voting against were Canada, Israel, the United States, the Federation of States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands and Palau. The Palestinians shown serious interest in the two-state solution since the mid-1970s, and its mainstream leadership has embraced the concept since the 1982 Arab Summit in Fez. Over the years, Poles has consistently shown respectable Israeli and Palestinian majorities in favour of a negotiated two-state settlement. There have been many diplomatic efforts to realise a two-state solution, starting from the 1991 Madrid Conference, there followed by the 1993 Oslo Accords and the failed 2000 Camp David Summit, followed by the Taba negotiations in early 2001. In 2002, the Arab League proposed the Arab Peace Initiative. The latest initiative, which was failed, was the 2013-14 peace talks. Extreme members of the Israeli government has envisaged a one Jewish state that would encompass all the land from beyond the Jordan River to the sea, as well as Gaza and what is parts of now Lebanon. The single Jewish state plan was abandoned by most Zionists, and became apparent that the Jews could not be decisive majority of all Palestine. Though today's settlers and right-wing Zionists propose various single-state solutions that all seek to maintain a Jewish majority in the land, either by expelling Palestinians or denying or abridging their political rights. With Hamas, they've proposed a one Arab state. This calls for a Palestinian Arab state in Palestine. This plan was put forward from time to time by different variants, all put to an end by Zionism, and would not allow free Jewish immigration to Israel. After World War II, the Palestinian leader Haj Amin al-Husseini told the British that the Jewish problem in Palestine should be resolved the same way as it has been solved by Hitler in Europe by murdering the Jews. In 1967, on the eve of the Six-Day War, Ahmed Shakari, then head of the PLO, spoke at the UN, giving the Palestinian one-state solution. He explained that, quote, if they are privileged to strike the first blow, end quote, the PLO would excel from Israel or Zionists who arrived from 1917 and create a secular democratic state. This secular democratic state became the problem of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and of the Fatah that sought to liberate Palestine from the Zionists by armed struggle. The Hamas and Islamic Jihad prefers an Islamic state in which the Jews and other religious minorities can remain as second-class citizens. Another proposal was bi-national state. This idea was advanced by Dr. Yehuda Magnez, president of the Hebrew University, and a Jewish philosopher, Martin Buber. This state would have Jewish and Arab cantons, similar to the Swiss, German and French cantons. This idea was presented to the Anglo-American Commission in 1946 and was favoured by the Mapai Party and by the USSR. However, the idea lost support as the Arab states and Palestinian leadership totally rejected it. The binational state had a few modern proponents, including Meron Bevelinsky, Noam Chomsky, and Edward Said. Another one was the Allon Plan. Israel general and political leader Yigal Allon formulated this plan for partition of the West Bank, with part of the land to be returned to Jordan as a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel PM Menachem Begin proposed that Israel would give autonomy to the Palestinians in a framework of the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. The autonomy would allow Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza to run their internal affairs, but would give them no rights all over the land and no representation as a sovereign state. This could have Jordanian or Egyptian leadership. A plan consistent with autonomy was submitted to the Israeli government in 1989. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Brief History Podcast. I've been your host, Andrew Knight. Editing, music, composing, all done by Harry Edmondson. Thank you once again for everybody who's reached out to us on social media. Please get in contact, let us know what you think of the episode and the new direction we're going in. We really need your input to help shape this podcast, so the more feedback you give us, the better. Please find us on social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter or Snapchat. We're Be History Podcast, so like, share, follow, retweet, tell your friends, and we can really grow this podcast. If you haven't already done so, please give us a 5-star rating, leave a review, tell us what you think. It really does help, and really appreciate everybody who's done so far, so please carry it on. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll be notified when a new episode is released. And like mine, it downloads it for me, so I don't need to do anything further. Tell your friends. We're on all the major podcast listening places. We're on Stitcher, Apple, TuneIn, Castbox, anyone you can think of really. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive #1, #2 employee. Leave a message at the... Hey, Jamie, it's me, Jamie. This is your daily pep talk. I know it's been rough going ever since people found out about your a cappella group, Mad Harmony, but you will bounce back. I mean, you're the guy always helping people find coverage options with the Name Your Price tool. It should be you giving me the pep talk. Now get out there, hit that high note, and take Mad Harmony all the way to nationals this year! Sorry, it's pitchy.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.